Well, I certainly can, and you'll find it in the Net Zero collection. One of my colleagues there, who's a very distinguished professor of combustion engineering, Gautam, has given some, frankly, hilarious examples of just running the numbers. Right. To understand why this is not only nonsense, but also what Jeremy Bentham would have called nonsense on stilts, you need to know, viewers need to know just one metric, which is the measure for energy density. And it's measured in watt hours per kilogram. So it's a material, and it's how many watt hours, in other words, how much energy for how long you get out of a kilogram of a material which it contains latent energy. Yeah. And it can be a liquid fuel or it can be a battery. And so just to start off, people need to be aware that there are major, major differences, which at the moment are unbridgeably different. Liquid fuels, on which the world runs, diesel, upon which the world runs, diesel as a fuel has an energy density of between 12,600 watt-hours per kilogram and 13 or thereabouts. The best batteries, lithium-ion batteries that we have at the moment, are somewhere between 185 watt-hours per kilogram and 200, with aspirations of trying to get them up to maybe 250. So it's not just an order of magnitude. Yeah. It's like many, 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 many orders of magnitude. And so what the professor does in our study, Professor Gautam, is simply apply this to a range of military vehicles. And shall I just read out his numbers for you?
Please do.
Right, so Professor Kalgatli tells us this about aircraft. He describes how the then Chief of the Air Staff, our Chief Marshal Wigston, wanted all British military aircraft to hit the net zero target by 2040. And he takes the Eurofighter, the Typhoon, 21,000 kilograms weight. It carries 4,000 kilograms of fuel with an energy content of 49 megawatt hours. A lithium-ion battery pack with the same energy content would weigh, wait for it, 13 times the maximum takeoff weight of the aircraft, assuming an energy density of 180 watt-hours per kilogram for the battery pack. And so he asked, where, pray, is the Air Chief Marshal going to put these batteries? Well, obviously he's not. So he then turns to the alternative, which is being very much pursued, which is SAF, or synthetic aviation fuel. And the problem with SAF is that it has a much lower energy density, meaning that you need to burn more of it for any given output of energy, so your range or your speed is reduced. But also it has a very disadvantageous power density. Now, power density is to do with the fuel, the feedstock to make the fuel. And if you're going to make this out of biological materials, it means there's an opportunity cost against using that land and the sunshine and the photosynthesis falling on the land to grow plants as feedstock to make this fuel, or to grow food to feed animals and human beings. He then turns to fighting vehicles, and for a Challenger tank, Challenger 2 tank, the figures are these that he gives. A Challenger 2 weighs 65 tons. It carries about 1,600 liters of diesel with 16 megawatt hours of energy. A lithium-ion battery pack with the same energy content, wait for it, weighs 89 tons. And so the professor asks, is the plan therefore to tow this thing around on a trailer behind the tank? But perhaps the most ridiculous example is when he turns to warships. And here he takes the aircraft carrier, the HMS Prince of Wales, which is one of these two very largest warships that the Royal Navy has built. 65,000 tons it displaces. And it has an electric final drive powered by marinized gas turbines and diesels. Now, it carries 3,500 tons of fuel with an energy content of 41,000 megawatt hours. A battery pack with the same energy content would weigh, remember the ship weighs 65,000 tons, the battery pack would weigh 150,000 tons. It would take 17 days to charge fully at a rate of 100 megawatts. Although the battery might catch fire, he points out, because, by way of comparison, a Tesla supercharger is 0.25 megawatts. And so he asks, rather ironically, where on earth would you stow these things? And where would you find sailors prepared to go into action in such an infernal machine? And what happens to ocean pollution when it either spontaneously combusts or it gets sunk? And how do you propose to charge a mega battery in the middle of a North Atlantic gale in midwinter, hunting Russian submarines? Ah, yes, says Professor Gautam. Oh, yes, you might install Wärtsilä diesel generator sets, such as we already have. And anyway, would you then have any hangar space left to put aircraft on this thing? I mean, he then he says, the fantasy of net zero carbon vehicles remains a fantasy. Why are we even being obliged to write a formal rebuttal of such nonsense? And yet we are. So there is huge work to be done. How is it that there are serious people inside the Ministry of Defense who are seriously entertaining these things? Is it that they just don't understand the basic physics? Well, it may well be. Even worse, as a hypothesis, is that the people promoting this do understand the basic physics. Because as he ends his essay, who are the people who are rubbing their hands with glee to hear about this sort of nonsense? Well, it's the generals of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, isn't it? Because they're not going to be doing that. They have a coal-fired grid which is built and is building the PLAN, and they have no intentions whatsoever of meeting any of these net zero targets, not anytime soon, not ever.